The sound didn't belong there. That's the only way I can describe it. A sound so small, so fragile, it barely registered over the hum of the engine, but something in me caught it, the way you catch a whisper in a loud room, and for a reason I still can't fully explain, I slowed down. That decision changed everything. It had been a long day. My hands were still stained with grease from the shop, a transmission job that had stretched 3 hours past its welcome. The clouds were moving in fast from the west, the kind of heavy, low clouds that carry rain and settle into your bones. I just wanted to get home. The road I take cuts through open farmland, no houses for a stretch, no streetlights, just flat fields on both sides, and an old county road that dips down where a small drainage ditch runs alongside it. That's where I heard it. I pulled my truck to the shoulder and cut the engine. The wind shifted, and there it was again, so quiet it almost wasn't there at all, a tiny sound. High-pitched, desperate, I stepped out. The mud sucked at my boots as I moved toward the ditch. The light was already fading, but I could see something in the tall grass just off the road edge, a small shape, moving slightly. When I got close enough to see what it was, I stopped dead. A kitten, barely the size of my fist, sitting not 3 feet from the white line of the road, where trucks had been passing all day at 60 miles an hour. He was covered in mud and road grit, matted and trembling. His eyes were open but glassy, the look of something that had been alone too long, in conditions too harsh for something that small. He opened his mouth and made that sound again, barely a cry, more like a breath that wanted to be one. I knelt down in the mud without even thinking about it. He didn't run, didn't flinch, just watched me with those wide, pale eyes, and kept trembling. Something told me this wasn't right. Something told me a kitten this young, this far from anything, this close to traffic, wasn't here alone. I looked past him, into the ditch. And that's when my heart completely fell apart. There was another one, lying in the wet grass, maybe 2 feet lower, mostly hidden by the overhang of the bank, smaller, still, no movement at all. I slid down into the ditch without thinking. The cold water went straight through my jeans. I reached into the grass and touched the second kitten, and I felt the cold the moment my fingers made contact. Not normal cool, the cold of something that has been lying in wet ground for a long time. He was still breathing, barely, his chest moving in tiny, uneven flutters. I looked at both of them, the shaking one on the road edge and this one in the ditch, and understood what I was looking at. Brothers. They had huddled together at some point. They'd done everything small animals do when they're afraid and waiting for a mother who isn't coming. And then whatever small warmth they'd shared had run out. No mother, no shelter, one already failing. The rain started then, not a drizzle, a real rain, the kind that comes in sideways. I pulled off my work jacket and wrapped both kittens in it as gently as I could. The stronger one, the one from the road, did something I didn't expect. He pushed his face against my palm and held on, not struggling, just holding on, like he'd already made a decision. I got back in the truck. I'll be honest, I didn't know what I was dealing with at first. I've been around domestic cats my whole life. Grew up on a farm. We always had cats in the barn, but these two didn't look like any barn cats I'd seen. Something about the face was different. The cheekbones were wider, the eyes were set differently, the ears shorter and rounded. I figured it was just the dirt and the low light and my own panic. I drove with one hand and kept the other on the jacket in my lap. The stronger kitten pressed against my fingers the whole way. I could feel his ribs when I touched him, each one distinct, like a tiny xylophone under skin. The other one didn't move at all. When I got home, I got them inside fast. I pulled out a cardboard box, lined it with an old flannel shirt that had been sitting in the dryer. Laid them both in and got the lamp from my desk to warm the space, not too close, just enough to take the chill out of the air around them. The second kitten's breathing was still wrong, shallow, too spread out between each exhale. I called the emergency wildlife line I'd had in my phone since a situation with an injured owl 2 years back. Explained what I had. The woman on the line asked me to describe them. I did the best I could, the wide face, the shorter ears, the unusual coloring. There was a pause. "Sir," she said slowly, "are you sure they don't look like domestic kittens to you?" "No," I said, "they really don't." Another pause. "You need to send me a photo right now." I took the picture with one hand while keeping the other near the box. Sent it. Her response came back in under a minute. 3 words. "Do not move them." Then her phone was ringing on my end, and I picked up, and what she told me next made the whole night feel different, made the road, The rain, the ditch, the cold, all of it feel like something I was only beginning to understand. But I didn't have time to think about any of that, because just before midnight, the second kitten stopped moving, not the trembling stillness of sleep, a different kind of still. I was sitting on the floor next to the box with my hand resting near them when it happened. He'd been breathing in small, uneven waves, and then, one exhale didn't come. I called the wildlife officer back. She gave me a number for an emergency vet with exotic animal experience, 40 minutes away. I told her what was happening. She said the words I was dreading. If he's still alive when you get here, he might have a chance, but the next few hours are going to tell you everything. I looked down at the tiny, still shape in the flannel shirt. The stronger one was watching him too, pressed close, not making any sound now. I grabbed my keys. The vet's office was a converted farmhouse set back from the road, lights burning in every window at that hour. I don't remember much of the drive. 40 minutes of dark highway, rain on the windshield, one hand on the wheel and one hand on the jacket in my lap. I talked the whole way. Not to myself, to them. Quiet words, nothing important, just the sound of a voice to fill the silence, the way you'd talk to someone who's sleeping and you're not sure if they can hear you but you can't stand the quiet. The stronger one, I was already thinking of him as the fighter, pressed against my palm every few minutes, just a small push, just enough. The other one didn't move. The vet's name was Dr. Inera Solis. She was waiting at the door when I pulled in, like the wildlife officer had already called ahead. She took the jacket from me in both hands, looked inside, and her expression shifted in a way that told me something I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She didn't say anything right away. Just carried them inside, set them under a heat lamp on the exam table, and started working with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done this in the dark many times before. I stood against the wall, useless, watching. "You found them on the road?" she said, not looking up. "Drainage ditch off County 9, maybe 2 miles past the grain elevator." She nodded slowly. "And no mother nearby?" "No." I waited, looked around, nothing. She gently pressed 2 fingers to the still kitten's side, watched, waited. "He's still with us," she said quietly. "Barely." The word barely landed in my chest and stayed there. What she told me next I hadn't been prepared for. These weren't stray domestic kittens, they weren't barn cats, or feral cats, or anything I had any experience with. What I had driven 40 minutes in the rain to save were 2 Pallas cat kittens, a wild felid native to the grasslands of Central Asia, named for the German naturalist who first described the species in the 1700s. I'd never heard of them. She showed me a reference image on her phone. I stared at it for a long moment. The wide, flat face, the low-set ears, the dense smoke-colored coat built for cold, the eyes that catch light differently from a domestic cat, rounder, set further apart, ancient-looking in a way that's hard to explain. I looked at the 2 kittens on the table, and then back at the photo. "How do 2 wild kittens end up in a ditch off a county road in the rain?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. She was adjusting the heat lamp, writing something down. "That's the question," she said. She let me stay. I don't know why. Most vets would have sent me home, but she handed me a stool and I sat in the corner of that exam room for the next 3 hours, watching her work. The still one, the one from the ditch, she placed in a small incubator, the kind used for neonatal animals. A device that maintained precise heat and humidity. She got a thin feeding tube and administered a glucose solution in the smallest possible amounts, checking his response each time, watching his color, listening to his chest. The stronger one, she placed beside him, close enough to touch. She told me later that was intentional, that siblings sometimes respond to each other in ways that no equipment can replicate, that there is something in the heartbeat and the warmth of a known body that functions almost like medicine for a young animal. I thought about that a long time. At some point after 2 in the morning, I must have fallen asleep on the stool with my back against the wall. When I woke up, the rain had stopped, the room was quiet, the heat lamp hummed. Dr. Solis was sitting at her desk writing notes. "Go look," she said without turning around. I stood up slowly, crossed the room and looked into the incubator. Both kittens were breathing. The one from the ditch, the one who had been still, his chest was rising and falling in small, even movements, regular, not the ragged flutter from the night before. I put my hand flat on the top of the incubator and just stood there. I'm not a man who cries easily. I grew up in a house where that wasn't something you did, but standing in that farmhouse vet clinic at 2:30 in the morning, I came very close. She sent me home at dawn with instructions, a warming kit, a small bag of supplies, and a printed sheet of emergency numbers. She also gave me the clearest warning I received through this entire experience. "These are not domestic animals," she said at the door. "Everything you know about raising kittens, set it aside. Their stress responses are different. Their trust timeline is different. What looks like progress one day can reverse overnight. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I said I did. I'm not sure I did. Not yet. The first 2 weeks were the hardest I've spent with any animal. Not because they were difficult. They were almost perfectly quiet. That was the difficulty. A domestic kitten in distress makes noise. These two went silent when they were overwhelmed, which was often, and silence in a small wild animal is not peace. It's a survival mechanism. It's the thing they do so a predator won't hear them. I had to learn to read everything else. The position of their bodies. Whether they were pressed together or slightly apart. Whether they were facing toward the center of the box or toward the edge. Whether they ate, whether they didn't. The one from the ditch was slower to recover, slower to engage with anything. He slept most of the time. But every day there was something. One more minute of alertness, one more moment of watching my hands move, one more small signal that something inside him was deciding to stay. The fighter, the one who had pressed his face into my palm on the road, was different from the start. He was curious before he was trusting, which I came to understand as the right order of things. He would watch me from the far corner of the box, tracking every movement with those wide, pale eyes, never quite committing to what I was. Not safe, not dangerous, just unknown. One afternoon, about 10 days in, I set my hand flat on the floor of the box and waited. He came to me, not quickly, not with any enthusiasm. He walked toward my hand the way you approach something you aren't sure about but can't stop thinking about, and when he got close enough, he pressed his nose to my knuckle and held it there for a moment. Then he walked away. That was the whole thing. That was enough. I named them at the 2-week mark. The one from the ditch I named Ash, for the color of his coat, which had dried into something between silver and smoke, the color of cold mornings. The one who had never let go of my hand on the road I named Scout. Within a week of naming them, Scout had figured out the latch mechanism on the box. I came into the room one morning to find him sitting on top of my work boots, methodically investigating the laces. Ash watched from inside the box. He was getting stronger every day, but he processed things differently than his brother. Where Scout moved toward the unfamiliar, Ash observed it first, watched it until he understood it. Then, quietly, on his own timeline, he would decide. I started to understand that I was living with two distinct personalities, two separate animals who happened to share a lineage and a ditch. They both followed me to the kitchen in the mornings. They both waited at the bathroom door. They both slept near me at night, not beside me, not touching, but close enough, on the floor next to the bed, pressed together, breathing in the slow rhythm of animals that feel, for the first time, that they can. But something kept pulling at me. How did they get there? The question didn't leave me alone. The wildlife officer, her name was Marguerite, and she called every few days to check in, told me that Pallas's cats, while occasionally kept illegally as exotic pets, were not native to this region. They were not escapees from any licensed facility she knew of. There was no record of a breeding pair in the county, or the counties around it. She was digging. 3 weeks after I brought them home, she called with something. A trail camera from a property 2 miles north of where I'd found them had captured footage from the weeks prior. Several images of an adult Pallas's cat, female she believed, moving along a fence line near the road, and then, in the later images, not moving along the fence line anymore. Evidence of illegal trapping activity had been found on the same property. Someone had been running traps illegally on that land. The most likely explanation was that their mother had been caught in one, and the kittens, separated and panicked, had scattered, one toward the road, one into the ditch. I sat with that information for a long time. I thought about what it meant, that something had been taken from them before I ever found them, that what looked like abandonment was something else entirely, that the mother hadn't left, the mother had been removed. That night, Scout slept on top of my feet. I let him. At 6 weeks, both kittens were eating well, moving confidently, interacting with their environment, with the focused, deliberate attention of animals that are supposed to be here, doing this, learning this world. Ash had started a habit of sitting on the windowsill each morning, not at the glass, just near it, watching the light change, the way certain animals watch the world, like they're waiting for something they can't quite name. I didn't know yet what he was waiting for. I found out on a Tuesday morning in October. I came downstairs before 6, put water on for coffee, and went to check on them. Scout was gone. The window latch, the one I had checked the night before, was hanging open at an angle that meant only one thing. I searched the house first. Every room, every corner, nothing. I opened the back door and stood in the cold morning air, calling his name in the way that felt ridiculous even as I did it. These were not animals that came when called. That was the whole point. But I called anyway. The field behind the house was still. The tree line at the far edge was dark and quiet. No movement, no sound. I looked back inside at Ash. He was sitting at the open window, not moving, not making a sound, just watching the direction of the trees. The first day, I told myself he was close. Animals don't travel far when they're young. That's what I kept repeating to myself as I walked the back field in the gray morning light, moving in slow grids the way you do when you're searching for something small in tall grass. I checked under the porch, behind the woodpile, along the fence line where the property meets the old logging road. Nothing. Ash sat in the window the whole time I was out there. I could see him from the field, that small pale shape against the glass, perfectly still, watching the direction I was walking. He didn't move from that spot until late afternoon. That night I left the back door cracked open an inch, just in case. In the morning the door was still cracked. The field was empty. The woodpile was still. Scout had not come back. By the third day I had covered every inch of the property twice. I walked the fence lines. I checked the drainage ditch where I'd found them, not because it made logical sense, but because I didn't know where else to look. I drove the county road slowly both directions, windows down, looking at the grass verges in a way that made me feel sick. Marguerite brought out a humane trap and showed me how to set it properly. She placed it at the edge of the tree line, with a scent lure and a piece of flannel from the box the kittens had shared. She said the scent of the familiar could draw him back if he was still in the area. How far could he have gone? I asked. She looked at the tree line. Pallas's cats are solitary and wide-ranging in the wild, even a juvenile. She paused. He could cover more ground than you'd expect. I didn't ask the follow-up question. I didn't want the answer. Ash changed. It happened gradually, the way most important things do, not in a single moment you can point to, but across several days that only make sense when you look back at them together. He stopped sitting on the windowsill in the mornings, started sitting on the floor instead, facing the back wall. He ate less, not dramatically, not enough that I would have panicked if I hadn't known what his normal looked like, but enough that I noticed, enough that I started weighing his food portions with a kitchen scale, so I had something real to track instead of just my own worry. He didn't seek me out the way he had started to, didn't follow me to the kitchen, when I sat on the floor near him and put my hand out the way I had learned to, flat, open, patient. He would look at my hand for a long moment, and then look away. Dr. Solis told me this was normal, that Pallas's cats form bonds differently from domestic animals, that their attachments run deep but quiet, and disruption to those attachments registers in behaviors that can look like illness even when the body is physically fine. He's grieving, she said, in the way animals grieve. I asked what that looked like from the outside. Like nothing is quite right, she said, and there's no way to explain it. Weeks passed. Marguerite checked the trap every 2 days. Empty. She reviewed footage from 3 trail cameras she'd set up along the eastern fence line and at the edge of the woods. Nothing. People who knew the situation, my neighbor Dale, the wildlife officer, Dr. Solis, had all arrived at the same quiet conclusion, the one nobody said out loud to me but that I could read in the way they carefully chose their words. Scout had probably not survived the first night outside. October temperatures here drop hard after dark. A young Pallas's cat has the instincts of a wild animal, but not yet the full experience. There were coyotes in those woods. There was the road. I kept the trap set. I kept the back door cracked on warmer nights. I kept the flannel in the trap because I couldn't bring myself to take it out. But I had started, slowly and against my own will, to believe what everyone else already believed. 26 days after Scout disappeared, I was replacing a fence post at the far eastern edge of my property when my phone rang. It was Marguerite. "I need you to come look at something," she said. "Don't get too excited, but come now." I drove the fence line in the truck, too impatient to walk. She was standing at the trail camera mounted on the old oak at the corner post. She didn't say anything. She just turned the camera toward me and pressed play on the review screen. The footage was from 2 nights prior. Timestamp read 2:14 a.m. The image was grainy and dark, the way all trail camera footage is at that hour. Washed out shapes, flattened by the infrared, but the shape that moved into frame from the left side was unmistakable. small, low to the ground. Moving with that particular deliberate quality I had spent weeks learning to read. Scout, alive, moving well, no visible injury, fur slightly matted but not drastically. He'd been finding cover somewhere, staying dry. I watched the clip 3 times without speaking. Then Marguerite said, "Keep watching." I looked back at the screen. Scout had stopped in the center of frame. He was facing something off camera to the right, ears forward, body still, the posture of an animal that is alert but not afraid, the posture of recognition. Then, from the right side of the frame, a second shape moved in, larger, adult-sized, moving with a fluid, unhurried confidence that was immediately different from Scout's tentative stillness. A female Pallas's cat. She stopped a few feet from him. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then she lowered her head slightly, and Scout moved 1 step toward her. The clip ended. I stood there at the edge of my property in the cold afternoon holding Marguerite's camera and not saying anything for a long time. She let the silence run. "Is that who I think it is?" I finally said. "We can't be certain," she said carefully. "We'd need behavioral observation over time, ideally a DNA sample, but the location is consistent, the timing is consistent, and the behavior." She paused. The way she approached him, the way he didn't run, that's not 2 strangers. That's not how wild felids interact with unfamiliar animals. I looked at the frozen last frame on the camera screen, the 2 shapes in the infrared wash, one large, one small. "She survived the trap," I said. "It appears so. Either she escaped or she was released." The trapping operation had been reported, and the property was investigated. Whoever was running it may have cut their losses and gone. We may never know the full story. I thought about the night I'd found them, the ditch, the cold, the sound that almost wasn't there. Their mother had been out there the entire time, somewhere in those woods, a mile from where her kittens were sitting in a box lined with flannel in my house. "She found him," I said. Marguerite nodded slowly. "She found one of them." The weight of that sentence landed full. She had found Scout. Ash was still inside my house, eating less than he should, sitting facing the back wall. M'applied enough, I drove home and sat in the kitchen for a long time. The question that had been forming for the past hour was the kind of question that doesn't have a comfortable answer no matter which direction you approach it from. Ash was not a domestic animal. I had known that from the beginning. Dr. Solis had said it at the door on the first morning. Marguerite had said versions of it in every check-in call. I had repeated it to myself whenever I felt myself getting attached in ways that worried me. But knowing something and feeling it are 2 entirely different things. In 6 weeks, Ash had learned the sound of my truck. He had learned which drawer I opened in the morning for the coffee. He had pressed his nose to my knuckle that afternoon in the box, and walked away, and then come back. He had chosen to come back. What I was now considering was choosing for him in a way he couldn't choose for himself. If his mother was in those woods, and his brother was with her, then the right thing, the honest, clear-eyed, genuinely decent thing, was to try to reunite him with them, to not keep him simply because I wanted to not make a wild animal's life smaller because I had fallen in love with the idea of him choosing me. I knew what the right answer was. I had known it, if I'm honest, the moment Marguerite pressed play on that camera. I sat with it anyway, let it settle, let it cost me something. I called Dr. Solis that evening and explained what Marguerite had found. She was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. "A reunion attempt is the right call," she said. "But Ryan, it needs to be done carefully, gradually. We'd want to monitor Ash's condition before we even talk about introduction. Make sure he's physically strong enough. He's been off his food," I said. "I know. I want to see him this week." A pause. "How is he otherwise?" I looked across the room. Ash was on the floor by the back wall, sitting with that particular stillness I had come to understand as his version of grief. "He's waiting," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Bring him in Thursday," she said. I agreed. I hung up. I sat back down at the kitchen table. From across the room, Ash turned his head and looked at me with those wide, pale eyes, held the look for a moment. Then he turned back to face the wall. Thursday morning, I woke before my alarm and went downstairs to check on him before making coffee, the routine I had kept every morning for 6 weeks. He wasn't in his usual spot. I found him by the back door, lying on his side, breathing in the shallow, uneven way that I recognized instantly, that I had seen once before, in a ditch off County Road 9 in the rain. I called Dr. Solis before I even put shoes on. She answered on the second ring and I told her what I was seeing and she said 4 words that I will remember for a very long time. Bring him right now. The drive was different from the first one. The first time, 6 weeks ago, I had driven in the rain with 2 kittens I didn't understand yet, toward an outcome I couldn't predict, running on adrenaline and instinct. There had been urgency, but underneath it a kind of forward momentum, the feeling that action itself was enough, that moving fast was the same as doing something right. This time I knew better. I knew what it meant when a Pallas's cat lay on its side and breathed like that. I knew what the shallow rhythm signaled. I had learned in 6 weeks of paying close attention the difference between an animal that is resting and an animal that is diminishing. And I knew, holding Ash against my chest with one hand on the wheel and the truck moving as fast as I dared on the empty morning road, that what I was feeling was not adrenaline, it was fear, plain and simple, the kind that sits in the stomach and doesn't move. I talked to him the whole way. Same as the first night, quiet words, nothing important, just the sound of a voice in the dark. Dr. Solace met me at the door again. She took Ash from me and moved quickly, and I followed her inside and stood against the wall in the same spot I had stood 6 weeks ago, the heat lamp, the exam table, the quiet efficiency of someone who loves animals in a way that looks, from the outside, like calm. The diagnosis came within the hour. A bacterial infection, the kind that moves fast in young animals, the kind that takes advantage of a compromised immune system. His body had been under sustained stress for weeks. The grief, the disrupted eating, the long adjustment, all of it had worn something down that the infection had found and entered. It's serious, Dr. Solis said. She wasn't softening it. I had come to appreciate that about her. But we caught it. If you'd waited another day. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I won't pretend those next several days were easy to sit through. Ash stayed at the clinic. I went home to a house that was quieter than it had ever felt to me, quieter even than before any of this had started, because silence that follows presence is a different kind of silence than the silence that was always there. I knew the difference now. I drove to the clinic every morning and sat in the waiting room while Dr. Solis updated me. I brought the flannel shirt from his box. She said familiar scents could help, that even in an animal too weak to move much, the nose was still working, still processing, still connected to whatever part of the brain registers safety. On the 3rd day she let me sit with him for a while. He was in a small enclosure with a heating pad beneath a folded towel. He looked smaller than I remembered, which is something that happens when an animal is sick. They seem to return to an earlier version of themselves, something more fragile and more essential at the same time. I sat on a stool beside the enclosure and didn't try to touch him, just sat there, close enough that he could hear me breathe. After a while he turned his head toward me. His eyes were glassy and tired, but they found my face, held it. I stayed until Dr. Solis told me gently that I should go home and sleep. The turn came on the 5th day. He ate. Not much, a small amount of the softened food Dr. Solis had been offering every few hours, but he ate it voluntarily, on his own, without coaxing. She called me at 7 in the morning and said, "He ate," and I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs decided they were done standing. After that it was gradual, the way real recovery always is, not a single dramatic moment but a slow accumulation of small ones. A little more food the next day, a little more alertness the day after. On the 8th day, when I came in, he was sitting upright. On the 10th, he tracked a dust particle across the room with his eyes for nearly a minute, which I recognized immediately as the focused, deliberate attention of an animal deciding the world is worth paying attention to again. On the 12th day, Dr. Solis said he could come home. November had come in while I wasn't paying attention. The mornings were colder now, frost on the truck windshield, the fields gone brown and flat, the tree line bare against a sky that stayed gray until almost noon. The world had shifted into its quiet season while I had been driving back and forth on the county road, sitting in waiting rooms, talking to a small sick animal in a heated enclosure about nothing important. Ash came home and immediately returned to his spot by the window. He sat there for a long time, looking at the bare tree line the way he always had, the posture of waiting, of some deep animal awareness pointed at something I couldn't see or name. I sat on the floor nearby and watched him watch the woods, and I thought about what came next. Marguerite had continued monitoring the eastern cameras through all of it. Scout and the female, his mother, we were now confident enough to say, though the certainty lived in evidence and behavior rather than in any document, had been captured on camera 11 more times over the past 3 weeks, always at night, always moving together. A loose orbit around the eastern edge of the property, the tree line, the old fence that separated my land from the fallow field beyond. She was keeping him close, but not confining him. Moving with him the way a wild mother moves with a juvenile that is learning to range, present but not restricting, watchful but not intervening. Scout was learning to be what he was. I looked at Ash by the window and felt the full weight of the two things I was holding at once: what I wanted, what was right. The distance between them, which was not as large as I might once have wished it was. I talked to Dr. Solis and Marguerite together over the phone one evening in mid-November. The reunion attempt, we agreed, would have to be slow. Ash couldn't simply be released at the tree line and left to it. That was not how wild-feeled family reunions worked, and the stress of an abrupt transition could undo everything we had spent weeks rebuilding. We would need to introduce scent first, then proximity, then allow Ash the choice. That last part Marguerite emphasized more than once. He has to choose it, she said. You can create the conditions, you can't make the decision for him. I understood that better than she probably knew. We set a date. The morning I had been preparing for arrived the way mornings do when you've been dreading and wanting something in equal measure, earlier than expected, and quieter. I loaded Ash into the transport carrier Dr. Solis had provided. He went in without much resistance, which surprised me, and then didn't surprise me, because Ash had always been the one who observed first and then decided. Maybe he had already decided. Maybe in whatever way a Pallas's cat understands the world, he already knew something was different about this morning. Marguerite met us at the eastern fence line. The carrier went down in the grass about 30 feet from the tree line. I sat back against the fence post and watched. We waited. The cold came up from the ground through my jeans. The sky was the flat white of late November. Somewhere in the bare trees a woodpecker was working at something steady and unhurried. The world did not know this was a significant morning. The world was just being itself. An hour passed. Then, at the edge of the tree line, something moved. Scout came out first. He stopped at the edge of the trees and looked across the open ground toward the carrier. His ears were forward, his body low and still in the way of an animal assessing, not afraid. Then he took 3 steps forward and stopped again. Inside the carrier, I heard Ash shift, a small sound, not a cry, not a call, just a sound that meant something was being registered, something recognized. Scout took more steps, slow, deliberate, covering the ground between the tree line and the carrier in stages, pausing each time, reading whatever information the air was carrying to him. He stopped 2 feet from the carrier door. I looked at Marguerite. She gave a small nod. I reached forward and unlatched the door. I didn't open it, just unlatched it, let Ash decide. For a long moment, nothing happened. I could see Ash through the mesh at the back of the carrier, sitting upright, looking at Scout through the open door with those wide, pale eyes that had looked at me the same way once. Not safe, not dangerous, just unknown, and then becoming known. Scout lowered his head slightly. Ash walked forward. He stepped out of the carrier onto the cold grass and stopped directly in front of his brother. They touched noses, held still, the particular stillness of animals communicating in a register that has nothing to do with sound. Then, from the tree line, the female moved. She came across the open ground without hurrying, the unhurried movement of an animal that has decided something and is simply carrying it out. She stopped several feet away, looked at Ash with the same focused assessment she had given the trail camera lens in every piece of footage I had reviewed. Ash looked at her. She lowered her head once. Something passed between them in the cold November air, something I cannot describe and wouldn't try to, because there are moments that belong entirely to the animals in them and to no one else. Ash took 3 steps toward her. She held her ground and let him come. I watched from the fence post. At some point Marguerite put her hand on my shoulder briefly and then removed it. That was enough. That was exactly the right amount. The 3 of them moved together slowly back toward the tree line, not rushing. Ash glancing back once. I want to be honest about this. I don't know what that glance meant. I am not going to tell you it meant what I needed it to mean. And then turning forward again, following his mother and his brother into the bare November trees. And then the tree line was still, and they were gone. I drove home alone. The house was quiet in the way it had been before any of this started, and also completely different. The box with the flannel shirt was still in the corner of the spare room. The food scale was on the kitchen counter. 2 small dents in the old dog bed I'd repurposed for them, side by side, where they had slept. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking at the back field for a long time. I thought about the sound that had reached me through the truck window on a rainy evening in early September. The sound that almost wasn't there. the thing that made me slow down when there was no good reason to slow down, when I was tired and the rain was coming and I just wanted to get home. I thought about how close I had come to not hearing it. The trail cameras stayed up through the winter. Scout and Ash and their mother appeared on them regularly through November and into December, three shapes moving together through the frost-silvered grass at the edge of the tree line, ranging wider as the weeks passed, the juveniles growing into the territory the way young wild animals do. By February, the camera catches them less often. They're moving farther now, learning the wider world. Last month, one camera captured Ash alone at the eastern fence line, sitting in the early morning light the way he used to sit at my window, still, watching. That posture of attention directed at something I can't see or name. He sat there for almost 20 minutes. Then he stood, turned and walked back into the trees. I thought I was rescuing two abandoned kittens from the side of a road. I thought I knew what that story was, the shape of it, the direction it moved, the place it was headed. Man finds animals, man saves animals, clean, simple, complete. I didn't know then that the story would save something back. I didn't know that 6 weeks of learning to read silence, the silence of a small animal deciding whether you are safe, the silence of an animal in grief, the silence of the tree line at dawn, would change the way I moved through every other kind of quiet. I didn't know that letting go could feel, simultaneously, like the saddest thing and the rightest thing a person has ever done, that those two feelings could occupy the same moment without canceling each other out. But they can, they did. And if you had asked me, that September evening with grease on my hands and rain coming in, whether I had time to stop, I would tell you I almost didn't. I would tell you I almost kept driving, and I would tell you that I am grateful, every single day, that something in me didn't.